In order to be good at Battlegrounds, you'll need to know which cards not to buy so you don't get baited into a terrible direction. We all know that base skill and Murgle are beyond broken, but which cards are so bad that you should pretty much never buy them? I'm Jeef. I recently hit 16k MR, and these are the top 10 worst cards in Hearthstone Battlegrounds. Starting off with the 10th worst card, we have Omega Buster. Omega Buster is not the worst tempo option to triple into with the mech setup, but that's all it is. Whereas before, Buster was a solid direction with cards such as Kangors, Baron, and Macaw. Nowadays, that just gets completely outscaled by most tribes in the game and definitely doesn't define your build. Mechs are in a pretty bad spot right now, and that also holds true with number 9 in the list, Utility Drone. Utility Drone is only viable if you have Beatboxer, Scrapscooper, and Drakari already set up, which is almost never. But in the 1 in 1,000 chance that you hit everything, the scaling provided could actually spiral out of control. Most of the time when you roll into this card, you have around 3 magnetics on your mechs, which gives a passive +3/+3 per turn, which is even slower than Lightfang Enforcer, so you should never consider it. Another card that has way too little scaling for the amount of setup requires is Tichondrius. Generally, the best way to actively scale with demons is with 2 Wrathweavers, and that on top of needing Tichondrius and the cycle spot, and because it's not scaling itself, you're scaling a grand total of 3 demons. That's really bad. Most key cards for demons are on Tavern 4 nowadays, such as Floating Watcher and Maltazar, and leveling up for this trash is never worth it. Moving on to some of the lower Tavern tier bait cards, Hummingbird isn't much good for anything. Its decent effect is made a lot worse by the fact that it's a 0/5, so it literally cannot trade into anything. It doesn't stay on your board for more than 3 turns most of the time, and Old Pack Leader, if you guys remember, which was bad by the way, is a lot better than this card. Cold Light Seer is also just not a good card to buy at any point in the game. Early game Murlocs are very bad because you'll lose every fight, and late game Murlocs now relies on hand buffing and not really board buffing. With the removal of poison, buffing HP on venomous units also just does not matter anymore, and Murky and Bagurgle are both far superior alternatives to the scaling that Cold Light Seer provides. In the same vein as Cold Light Seer, Salt Scale Honcho salt scales pretty poorly. Once again, playing early game Murlocs and buffing HP is bait because you really don't want to be buffing Murlocs on board now without the ability to poison them later. I do have to give Honcho some credit though for being actually a good unit in Overseer Orb lobbies because then you would know that the only cards you would buy are Murlocs. Also, a Murloc that is completely horrible is the tier 1 Murloc Rockpool Hunter. It's terrible to buy standalone because it's a vanilla 2/3, and pretty much the only situation where you could possibly buy this card is if you bought a Swamp Striker already, but then you bought a Swamp Striker. Did I mention how bad early game Murlocs were? Anyways, Murlocs may be the strongest tribe in the game, or one of the strongest, but you definitely want to pivot into this tribe instead of playing the tribe early game because you will lose every fight. Before we get into the top 3, I just want to point out that it's actually really hard for me to find gameplay for these cards because, as you may have guessed, I literally never buy these cards. So that's why you guys should just subscribe so I can make more high effort guides like this one and you guys get free content. Anyways, back to the list. The third worst card in the game is actually Critter Wrangler. Critter Wrangler Nagas used to be considered fair scaling and one of the main ways to actually scale a cleave, but now the scaling is all just super unfair and Critter Wrangler can just never complete and it's not even close. Its only purpose is to give some free stats when you're playing Deep Blue Zeddy, but as far as the direction, it's far from it. At this point, we've gone over a lot of 5-drop directional cards that end up being completely horrible, like the one for demons, mechs, and nagas, and the one for kobolds is no exception. Agam made it to the top 3 worst cards in the game because it's just not playable with the new ways to play kobolds. Even if you put gems on Agam, most of the time you'd much rather just put your gem on your cleave or the minion you want to buff because the gems are buffed and you don't want to put your gems on the Agam. Like, the new direction of gem buff Quobors combined with Agam's linear scaling just makes it by far the second worst card in the game. However, one card stands above the rest as the worst card in Hearthstone Battlegrounds for actually a long while, and really makes you think how they didn't just cut this card from the game in all these balance patches. Rolling into this card is -1 shop slot all of the time. I'm of course talking about Strong Shell Scavenger. Strong Shell Scavenger was considered good scaling back in 2020. However, the cards got stronger and stronger and we're no longer winning games with single life hang. First of all, you have to taunt your whole board to actually get value from Strong Shell Scavenger, which makes you extremely susceptible to Cleave and Leroy's and Venom and all of that. And second of all, you actually need to roll into Strong Shell Scavengers for it to be remotely useful, which isn't even that much better than just buying a Menagerie Jug. And let's say you're actually playing for taunt comp, which is like the only situation you would buy this card, then oftentimes this comp you're board locked, you don't have space to cycle, you don't have a cycle spot, and you definitely don't even have space for brand. So the stats are just pathetic and not even worth buying in the best case scenario. So this card is just undisputably the worst card in Hearthstone Battlegrounds. Did any of these cards surprise you? Comment down below whether you think I missed any cards or whether you've actually had success with any of the 10 cards that I mentioned. Thank you guys so much for watching.